I noticed something last time I went to the supermarket. I observed that where I live, here in Switzerland, there are American products absolutely everywhere. I can walk a few meters without stumbling on some product from Uncle Sam. It can be cars, restaurants, sweets, rice, computers, softwares, phones, calculators, shoes, phone applications, credit cards, cryptocurrencies, or alcohol, or cigarettes, or firearms. You see what I mean? American products are absolutely everywhere. But why is that? How could US products become so omnipresent pretty much everywhere in the world? That is exactly what you're going to find out in this video. We're going to see that it has to do with culture, history, geography, law, and quite a few factors. Let's dive in. But before we get started, please hit the subscribe button down there and activate the notification bell to never miss a new video. Let's start from the beginning. To understand why American products are pretty much everywhere, I think we first have to understand entrepreneurship. Because, well, somebody had to create this company that manufactured those products. And first we have to understand why entrepreneurship in America is so common and so successful. One of the reasons why there might be so many entrepreneurs in the United States might be because of its history, the way the United States were created and built by immigrants. Some studies suggest that immigrants in Western countries are more likely to be entrepreneurs. It seems like there is an overlap of the traits of immigrants and entrepreneurship. One of them, but that is just my personal opinion about it, is that immigration is risky. So immigrants are more prone to taking risks, just like entrepreneurs. Or that immigrants are more likely to take action to improve their lives, just like entrepreneurs. So the only fact that the US was built by immigrants and that everybody living in the US today are either children or grandchildren or great-grandchildren from immigrants might be an explanation of why there are so many entrepreneurs in the US and, as a consequence, why there are American products absolutely everywhere. And also, when all those immigrants arrived, well, the country was pretty much empty and full of resources to be exploited. Compare that to Europe, that was very crowded and where every square meter of land was already the property of somebody. Usually the property of elite groups, such as the church or aristocrats. All that goes to say that it was maybe easier for anybody to start a business from scratch in the US, that was empty and full of resources to be taken, versus Europe, where everything was already taken. Compare, for example, opening a coal mine in the US. Maybe it was much easier because there were lots of coal mines that were there, the property of nobody, waiting to be exploited. Whereas in the UK, for example, well, all the coal mines were already taken by somebody. It was already somebody else's property. But as you can imagine, being a country full of ambitious immigrants and full of resources to be taken is not enough. Because yes, in the US there is a lot of entrepreneurship, but in other countries that have exactly the same characteristics, lots of immigrants and lots of resources, such as all of Latin America, well, they don't have that much entrepreneurship. It's actually pretty low. This difference between the US and Latin America tells us that there are other factors that influence entrepreneurship. And again, history might give us a clue. Immigrants who went to North America before it became the United States usually received some piece of land. They either bought it or, more often than not, they received it for free. It was part of an immigration incentive plan created by the United Kingdom to populate North America. So the US was a country made up of a lot of small landowners. In Latin America, it was very different. The land was the property of very few wealthy aristocrats based in Spain or Portugal. So the immigrants who arrived to Latin America to exploit the resources were very rarely the owners of the land. If you will, they were like the employees of the aristocrats. As a result, Latin America as a whole was a territory owned by very few big landowners. That is a big difference between the colonization of Latin America and the US and Canada. And you might wonder, what is the connection between the colonization and entrepreneurship? Look at it this way. If you're the owner of a small piece of land, you have wealth, you have net worth, and it might be easier for you if you had net worth to start a business. On the other hand, if you're just an employee with zero net worth, you don't possess anything, you might be discouraged to start a business. Because if you start a business, more likely than not, you need outside financing. And if you have a piece of land that is yours, you can use it as a collateral, as a guarantee. And those investors are more likely to lend you the money if you give them the piece of land as a guarantee. So the fact that the US was a country of a lot of small landowners might explain why entrepreneurship flourished in the US and not really in Latin America. And one interesting fact, the top 3 countries that are the most entrepreneurial are the US, Canada, and Australia. 3 countries that were colonized the English way, with many small landowners. This type of colonization created the first entrepreneurship success stories in the US. The first stories of people arriving to the US with nothing and achieving big enterprises. Which leads me to my second point. The second reason why American products are everywhere might be because the American culture and the American laws are very friendly towards entrepreneurship. Think about it. Americans love underdogs. They love the stories of people starting with absolutely nothing, starting from ground zero and becoming the greatest. Just like in the movie Rocky, where an unknown and struggling boxer becomes a national champion. And he achieves that only with willpower and persistence. And something else in the American culture that really encourages entrepreneurship is that failure is not shameful. Because entrepreneurship is risky. When you create your business to create a product and sell it to the world, you're exposing yourself to failure. Because failure is accepted and not that shameful, you will be less fearful as an entrepreneur to get started. In Europe, the culture is very different, and there are some aspects of this culture that actually discourages entrepreneurship. Failure is considered to be shameful and something to be avoided at any cost, and having big ambitions can be seen as greedy. And the European culture values much more being a reasonable person and a realistic person. So all those things rather discourage entrepreneurship. And this American culture that encourages entrepreneurship also had an influence on laws. And again, the laws in the US are much more favorable for people who want to create a business compared to other places in the world. And to be precise, the bankruptcy laws in the US are very particular. Here in Switzerland, for example, if you borrow money to start a business and then you cannot pay back the money anymore, well, everything is stripped away from you, everything is sold, all your assets, and you try to pay as much money as possible, as much debt as possible. But you still have to pay any remaining debt, and this debt stays with you the rest of your life. The US in that regard is very different. If you owe money, if you have a lot of debt because you started a business and you cannot pay the debt anymore, well, everything is stripped from you. You have to pay all the assets, that is right. But if there is any remaining debt, this debt is forgiven. The debt is simply gone. Poof.
And it's gone. Poof.
And as a result, entrepreneurship flourishes because the American laws give you another chance. They give you another chance to start all over again. Even Henry Ford failed the first time and he had to declare personal bankruptcy. The sacred Henry Ford. If Henry Ford lived in Europe, he would have to pay the debt the rest of his life after his first failure. Maybe that if Henry Ford lived in Europe, he would have not tried again to build a business, and he would not have become the Henry Ford that we all know today. The third reason why American products are everywhere is the big local market. Indeed, if you start a business in the United States, you have from the get-go a big local market, a big addressable market. You have one big local market without borders, without tariffs, with people who speak the same language, with people who have the same national identity, the same culture, the same tastes. You got the idea. Starting in a big local market is an advantage because first you conquer your national market, and then since this national market is so big, you have enough cash and enough resources to start conquering international markets. Compare that with starting a business in Spain with 47 million people. Once you conquered the local market, you want to go internationally, but it's kind of difficult because you have to change the language, you have to change the product, tweak a few details, you have to change the marketing, you have to change the promotion because people have different tastes, different cultures, different languages. It's difficult, and since you have a local market of only 47 million people, you don't have as much means and resources compared to the American company that already sold the product to 300 million people. The case of McDonald's is pretty telling. First, they went national, and once they done it with many restaurants, because America is a huge market, they had a lot of resources, a lot of money to export McDonald's to other countries. They had much more money for marketing, advertisement, funding operations, and so on. So the fact that the United States has a big local market certainly played a role to see all those American products everywhere in the world. And as you can imagine, in the internet age and with all that globalization, having a big local market is not as strong anymore, it's not as strong as an advantage anymore, but still, it has a little effect. And finally, the fourth reason why American products are everywhere has again to do with history. It is the Second World War. I know it sounds weird, but let me explain. During the war, there was a lot of effort that was done to innovate and to improve manufacturing processes to make better weapons, better airplanes, better boats, better submarines, and finally, creating the atomic bomb. All this innovation during the war allowed the Americans to have better factories and better technologies at the end of the war. And at the end of the war, Europe was completely devastated. All the factories, or at least most of them, were completely destroyed. And even though the war was over, and despite the fact that everything was destroyed, all those Europeans, they still wanted to eat and consume. Since the American factories were still intact and the European factories were completely destroyed, well, people had no other choice than to buy a big amount of American products and American food. The case of cigarettes is pretty interesting. Disclaimer, this is not an advertisement for cigarettes. Smoking is really bad for your health. Just don't do it. Before the war, Europeans mostly smoked European cigarettes. French people smoked French cigarettes, German people smoked German cigarettes, and so on. At the end of the war, Europeans still wanted to smoke, but the cigarette factories in Europe were almost completely destroyed, and here came the American cigarettes, right from the intact and new factories in the US. It was literally an invasion of the American cigarettes. And Europeans started smoking American cigarettes, and exactly the same story can be applied to a lot of different products. And still today, American cigarettes completely dominate the tobacco market here in Europe. And that is how, after the Second World War, the United States became a superpower and their products invaded the entire planet and are now everywhere today. And even this guitar here is American. I hope you liked this video. If that is the case, a little thumbs up is always appreciated. Don't forget to hit the subscribe button, and if you want to find out how to overcome any obstacle in life, check out this video, and I will see you soon.